This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Thanks for joining me in this special fresh hop focused episode of the podcast brought to you interruption-free by the freshness experts at RipeLocker. RipeLocker has patented a radically innovative storage solution to revolutionize the post-harvest industry with technology to extend the shelf life of perishables such as fresh hops while preserving quality and taste. The company's dynamic low-pressure chambers prolong freshness after harvest by weeks, often months. And for brewers, this opens up some new ways to think about fresh and wet hop beers. Through today's episode, we're going to focus on wet hop brewing from harvest, through the fermentation and finishing beers. And we're going to talk about transportation, the logistics of all of this. RipeLocker certainly opens up new channels for brewers to think about these beers. So I'm excited to have this conversation. Joining me for the conversation are RipeLocker Senior Director of Fruit Science, Brendon Anthony. Welcome to the podcast, Brendon.
Thank you.
That's a cool title, Senior Director of Fruit Science.
Can't beat that.
Also joining me are Oasis Farms Hop Manager Tyler Sabin. Welcome to the podcast, Tyler.
Thank you.
Also joining us are Coronado Brewing R&D brewer Bart Gumpert, who took time out of your crazy sailing schedule to join us on an overnight sailing trip last night. And now you're here talking about fresh hops with us today. Welcome to the podcast, Bart.
Happy to be here. A little tired, long journey, but wouldn't miss this one for the world.
We've talked about fresh hop brewing on the podcast in the past. There are as many different ways to do it as there are brewers doing it. We've certainly parsed out differences between fresh hops, wet hops, current season dry hops, and we've produced a lot of podcasts as well as video classes out it. What we haven't talked about is the technology that RipeLocker brings to the game, which is ability to time shift to some extent this fresh hop brewing to brew with different fresh and wet hop varieties that may be harvested at different times, and to also kind of slow down and to lower the carbon footprint potentially, because right now for people that aren't within a driving distance of a hop harvesting area, it becomes very hard or very expensive to then you have to get into airplanes and everything else in order to have true wet hops for brewing. And so it's interesting now to talk about this technology. Maybe we should kick things off talking about what that technology is. And so Brendon, why don't you just give us some background in what RipeLocker's tech is and how that applies to fresh hops?
Yeah, you bet. So RipeLocker at its core is a low pressure or hypobaric chamber, and it's not really a new technology in the sense that people have known about low pressure as a storage technology for many, many decades. It was actually a technology that was developed by NASA back in the 70s when they were, doing more space exploration and trying to figure out, what happens when you put things into a, zero atmosphere type of environment. So it's something that's been around for a while. We're at RipeLocker trying to just commercialize this, make it cost effective, make it scalable, make it portable. And so that's kind of what we've done. And so we have a pallet sized hypobaric chamber that you can put all different types of fruits, vegetables, flowers, etc. inside and extend the post-harvest life of that perishable. And so in the context of fresh hops, we've done a lot of R&D to try and determine the optimal levels of oxygen and CO2 and pressure to kind of develop a superior recipe, so to speak, for the optimal storage conditions. And so you can then load the fresh hops inside of our chamber and we can monitor that in real time. And what that really does is allows us to reduce the respiration of the hops and slow down the senescence. So something that usually goes bad in a day or two or a week can now be extended for up to 60 days. And so we can store the hops longer and kind of democratize this wet hop market, as you mentioned, and get hops further across the country, all by truck. And you can do that in a much more cost-effective way.
Sure. Talk to me about how that actually works. Like, how do you then remove oxygen from these chambers, and how does it, and then what are some of the other parameters? Obviously, maintaining that sealed chamber so that there is no oxygen ingress, that it does it itself. But talked about other kind of temperature concerns. And then, Tyler, I want to talk to you guys about how you all prep those hops before they then go into the RipeLocker.
Sure. So every chamber is hooked up to a central vacuum. And so the vacuum will pump air out. And what is really unique about the RipeLocker is that, one, we've been able to develop vacuum at scale at a cost-effective price point, which is really difficult because you have 84,000 pounds of force pressing down on this chamber. And so to make it out of plastics and to make it, forkliftable, all these things, right? There's been a lot of R&D and engineering that's gone into that. And so there's a big feat there. But what's also really cool about the technology is that it's hooked up to a central control system where that vacuum then pulls air out of each chamber, and it all populates data onto a dashboard. And so we can monitor in real time the oxygen consumption of the hops, the CO2 production of the hops. And so we can see if the respiration starts going up, okay, maybe there's something wrong, like the hops are senescing or some sort of issue that may arise. And we can alert then the grower packer, hey, these hops should be sold first, or these hops can store longer because the respiration is staying lower. And so we have this really unique data aspect of it as well, where we can kind of control and monitor the chambers in real time to be able to optimize inventory management. But certainly temperature is king. And so we want to be storing these at 0C or 32 or just above freezing to keep them nice and fresh as well. So it's the synergy of both the low temperature, the low pressure, and the low oxygen that's really extending the life of the hop.
Do these lockers have ongoing monitoring, or is that monitoring just happening in the packing process?
So anytime we have a cell signal or Wi-Fi signal, they are being continuously monitored. When they are loaded up onto the truck, we don't have access to that. But certainly once they arrive at the brewer, if they hook them back up to the system, then all the data would populate from that journey as well. So it's continuous in so much as there's a cell signal and it's hooked up to the control system.
That's still a nerdy level of monitoring that
it is.
The data fanatics out there.
We got a lot of data.
Being able to constantly understand what state those fresh hops are in. That has to be, one, reassuring, and two, just give you some insight into this that you certainly don't get if they're sitting in a bale or So that's some serious insight.
Yeah, you get a lot of really cool data out of it. And something that we've really tried to do and push the limit on is we've held the fresh hops for 100 days to see how far we can really push it. And what's really interesting is that at about 100 days, you start to see the metabolism of the hop shift from consuming carbohydrates to consuming proteins, because it's a flower, it's not a fruit. And so there's not as much carbohydrate reserves as you might have, let's say, in a blueberry or an orange. And so in a hop or in a flower, you actually don't have that many carbohydrates. And so the amount of carbohydrates will really dictate how long that hop can be stored. And so what we can see is at about 100 days, those carbohydrates are fully utilized and starts to metabolize proteins, which will then start to give you, flavors or aromas like ammonia, because now you're, converting all that nitrogen. So you don't want that, obviously. So we've kind of set the ultimate limit of a hop you could probably hold for about 100 days. We're not fully there yet. We'd like to get it there as far as we can. And that's kind of where my job in the R&D process is taking us.
I want to come back to it later and talk about some of the differences that you might have found between different hop varieties and whatnot, because I imagine with this kind of data and insight, that's just something I can't not ask you about.
Sure.
But before we do that, I want to talk to Tyler. Why don't you talk a little bit about, from a grower perspective, what your pre-processing looks like, and what kind of state, even what kind of moisture level in the hops themselves. Talk to me about the pre-processing process and follow those hops from harvest through picking, through the cleaning, through the picker, and then what your process looks like in filling RipeLockers from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Oasis Farms, we run a Donauer picker, which is pretty traditional, old-style German picker. And what we're doing with 3-bank cleaning system is basically removing all the sticks, leaves, stems, seeds, any of that type of stuff that isn't the hop cone, including the vine itself, and removing all of that so that what ends up in our kiln is just the hops. And prior to the season starting, we have been last year trying to accept what I call pre-orders on our website for this project, which is Oasis Farms Fresh Hop. And on that site, we've got a form for brewers to kind of pre-order what they would want to have, so that leading up to harvest, I kind of have an idea, what are we going to be expecting to be putting into these RipeLockers. So when harvest happens, we get a certain pick window based off of guidelines given to us by the various brokerages that we work with in terms of selling. So in those pick windows, what we do is I try to select the best possible fields that have the best selection preferences from historical data to be pulling from to put hops into the RipeLockers, basically pulling from the best fields that we have data on. And then once the hops hit the kiln, which before they do, they come in on a series of belts.
Before we talk about that, I'm curious about this, in terms of determining a pick window, because a pick window potentially for a fresh hop and what you want out of a fresh hop might be a little different than a pick window that you might want for something that's going to be palletized, and used down the road. How do you all think about what those pick windows might be for specifically for fresh hops?
It does come down to basically dry matters still, which is what is the oil content of this cone look like at this time? How much wet content is there versus how much dry content is there? And that gives you an idea of about exactly how ripe do you want it to be. And there is an optimum number you're shooting for there when you're taking these measurements. We will collect those with the help of Yakima Chief's team at Yakima Chief Hops, and then we will select those fields that we're picking at optimal ripeness to be the ones that we send off into the RipeLockers. So that's part of what we do. And so even inside of a window, which was typically a week or so between the months of August and September, late August to late September for pretty much all hops in Washington State. And then within that time period, there's a certain week for each variety typically, which looks like anywhere from 3 days to 7 to 10 days to get a certain variety picked. What's different about RipeLockers is within that window, you're looking to do a specific time of day where you want to be picking these hops when all the morning dew is off of them, but also when they're not hot from coming out of the field too much. So for us, what we found is right around like noon to 3 o'clock works great. They chill down faster. They have less overall heat inside of them, just ambient heat from the outside environment. And then what we'll do is we'll line up at the end of our belts where we're about to start dumping into the kiln, and we will just start collecting 50-pound bags or so using basically mesh bags that are food grade to then take over to our blueberry pack shed where we have a cooling house. And so we'll fill all these bags, take them right over to our pack shed, chill them down for about 24 hours, and then they go right into the RipeLockers and they get sealed. And then they're basically good to store under the conditions Brendon just mentioned.
So these truly are wet hops. They're not, you're pulling them out pre-kilning, and then allowing those again to cool down before they then get packed, and but otherwise a very normal wet hop process.
Correct. Yeah, we're actually collecting them. Basically, they're landing. We're standing in the kiln with a big bag, groups of 3 or 4 guys, grabbing them off the belt, and then we take whatever poundages we need, take them off the pack shed, and then we fire up that kiln and cook the rest of what came in.
Sure. And then, in terms of temperature, after that, they then get packed in this facility that you have with this vacuum that Brendon was talking about earlier. And from that point, they need to stay, in a certain temperature range.
Yeah, we keep them at our pack shed, which is kept right around 33 degrees, and they store over there, which is a great environment for them because it's a food grade, fully inspected facility. It's global gap compliant, and it gets kept at 32 degrees, 33 degrees, and it has Wi-Fi monitoring set up over there. So all the back-end logistics Brendon and his team can do to track all the data and monitor the actual tanks themselves.
Sure. One of the interesting things is because, as you mentioned, Brendon, there's this, you've got this lifespan now to these fresh hops. And as you were also mentioning, Tyler, like you now don't have to think about fresh hop brewing in the same kind of way that we have all, even within the stories we've done with brewers so far, thinking about what our hop blend is going to be, which is always going to be whatever's being harvested that day. or within a day or two of each other, because that is all the lifespan that you have when those hops are wet. There are some crazy brewers like Steve Luke at Cloudburst who'll let his stay an extra day and get a little funkier before he uses them. He's probably an outlier in this whole fresh hop thing. But maybe you can talk to that a little bit, Bart. What has been being able to time shift the use of different fresh hop varieties meant for how you think and plan out beers?
Yeah, spot on. It's so unique that you could, in the past, you're kind of bound by, all right, we're going to get Monday and Tuesday is harvest and those hops are it, but now you can stretch that out over, 6 weeks. You can get something early harvest, and then you can wait, you can get Mosaic and Centennial in the same year and put it in one beer. And, before that wasn't even possible. And especially being all the way down in San Diego, that was almost completely out of the question without spending an arm and a leg. But having that extended life has been amazing for, designing beers without these handcuffs on.
Sure. How did you all find yourself thinking about and designing fresh hop beers now, knowing that you weren't constrained by only what was available at the time? Did that reflect itself in anything new, any different approach to fresh hop brewing?
Yeah. So the first year we did it 2 years ago for the first time, and that was kind of a trial run to see the process and the quality of the product, and was absolutely blown away. It's insane. It was actually like you open up the locker and you're kind of a little suspect on what's going to be inside, and you get these bags and they look like they are just straight off the vine. It was a beautiful bright green color, completely aromatic, even like the right level of moisture. So having that and knowing that you were getting quality hops and then using it the first year with great success, we started scaling up. So next year we're considering even doing a production level batch into cans, because we can, like, the scalability is here. We can play around with our windows, and the product has been so good. So in terms of, the handcuffs being off, it kind of gives us an idea to, toy around with maybe a couple different varieties and then have a couple different releases. So last year, for example, we did, of course, a fresh hop IPA, but then we got crazy and did one of those cold IPAs. So we were able to do two different beers, both with Mosaic and Eldorado, but able to do a side-by-side comparison of what the Mosaic Eldorado fresh hop IPA versus cold IPA. So it gives us experimentation, but consistent quality with less restriction, which is just never an option before. The fresh hop before was always, kind of bound by, luck and fate, and whatever window you get.
Sure. Anything, I'm curious about this, like, from your perspective as a brewer, and I don't know if you've got some thoughts on this too, Tyler, like what were some of the sensory impacts of those fresh hop, using different varieties of fresh hops, and what is it about, the character of these fresh hops that draws you as a brewer to it, or you as a hop grower? What are some, versus, in this wet hop form versus, say in a dry or pelletized form?
Yeah, certainly. For me, it's just such a unique, like fresh hop beers in general. They just have this unique character to them. We all kind of know and love it, and sometimes it's hard to necessarily put like what exactly makes it so different. But I feel like it's just the hop in its purest form. You feel like you're inside of a picker when you're drinking that beer. It like transports you. I've been lucky enough to do our sojourn to Yakima a couple times, and I feel like when I drink a fresh hop beer, it transports me back there. So just back to the hop itself, I feel like it really puts it in its purest form. You get more of those bright, fruity, like kind of punchy notes. I just think overall, you don't get those changes that happen in the kilning and, of course, the packing and aging process. It just takes you back to the kiln or even the field. So that's what I love most about fresh hop beers. And it's been pretty exclusive down here. I mean, there's not a lot of people in San Diego that have been able to do it in the past, and it's very exciting to see RipeLocker kind of opening up the doors for us. So it'll be interesting to see what the next couple of years brings.
Sure. Bart, when you brew with fresh hops, what does your process look like? Obviously, brewers that I've talked to in the past have a whole range, from hot side additions, hot side steep to, basically hop, post boil hop stand, or, even some folks like, Ben at Breakside are purely doing cold side steep, basically wet dry hopping, and everyone, different brewers with different techniques, each swear by their own techniques. There's a little bit of a crazy religion going on depending on what side you fall on. For you, what's the Coronado approach to process look like?
Yeah, there are certainly a million ways to do it. I think ours is one of the more safe and probably more traditional ways I've heard a lot of other brewers doing. We have a 30-barrel brew house. So once we get our kennel full and get the boil going, we empty out the mash tun, get that nice and as clean as a whistle. And then we start loading the hops into the mash tun. So post boil, we will send the wort back over to the mash tun with the rakes going for slow agitation. Do about 20 minutes between transfer time and steep time. It'll be about 40 minutes, about 20 minutes on the wort transfer, and then steeping, and then sending it back and resuming the process to send to the whirlpool. So I feel like that's one of the more common methods. Certainly nice having that heat aspect to it, but with the, in the spirit of being adventurous, I would like to try a cold dry hopping approach this year. So we'll see what we can fit in the budget, and how much I get to play around with this year.
Talk to me about the receiving and then opening and the physical aspect of using hops that are coming out of the RipeLocker.
Oh yeah, I mean that's like as exciting as flying all up to Yakima without spending the money. Like that was so the like mentioned earlier, the RipeLockers are on a little pallet-sized skid. So we got I believe 2 the first year, 4 last year. So all the brewers kind of huddle around these little containers, and you slowly depressurize them, and then you release this lid off the top, and it's just filled with, the bags were, Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong, but 25 to 50 pounds each or so, and we're getting 150 in there. So it's just a bunch of bags of just beautiful green hops and just so aromatic. Like it fills up the whole brewery with just the beautiful smell we all love. And then it's fun too, because then you have, 20 bags or so, and, we have a team, I feel like a bunch of Oompa Loompas going up the brew house with all these little bags of hops, swapping them up into the mash tun, and everyone's just like, kind of like throwing them at each other and just dumping them in and having like, oh man, it's like a field day in the brewery. It's hard to like keep everyone under control with how much fun we're having.
But that's interesting, and the fact that they're bagged like that actually does, from a logistical standpoint, make it much easier to get them from a container into the actual brew kettle, for that kind of use process.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was concerned they weren't going to be in bags, and we're going to have to like use a forklift, hoist it up, dump it in inside of, we have a maybe 1.5 manway. That was like very inconvenient. So the bags are almost the same size as the manway. So you cut them open, dump them in, and onto the next one. So the process, I don't know if that was preconceived or just coincidence, but well thought out and worked great for us. And like I said, having, it gets the full team involved. It's just so exciting, and I'm getting all jazzed up just thinking about doing it again.
Yeah, I was just going to mention on the bags, one thing that we've noticed has been that certain varieties are denser than other varieties. And so we may have a 50-pound bag, but just because hops are kind of a light, voluminous object in general, they'll take up a whole bag pretty quick. So pretty soon we were trying to put, let's get 25 pounds in this bag. Well, you'd need a way bigger bag to do that. So we ended up, some varieties we can only get 11 pounds before the bag's full, and other varieties we can get 25 or 40 or 50. So it's kind of pretty interesting to see just what the difference in density of these cones are between varieties.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see that, because obviously, the chambers is volume limited apparatus. And so, the brewers obviously want to maximize that space. And so seeing the different varieties and their densities have a big impact on how many pounds we can fit in the RipeLocker, anywhere between 125 to over 200 pounds. So it's interesting to see how that cone density then impacts on like the logistics and the volume efficiency of the shipment as well.
What are some of the ranges, and are there specific hops that that are more dense or less dense than others? Not that necessarily translates into quality of brewing or concentration of oil or anything else other than that. But it's curious to think about that kind of physical difference of these hops.
Yeah, so we've seen Simcoe is definitely on more like the denser end of things. Citra is a fairly dense hop as well. So you can fit a lot of pounds in a bag, and then therefore you can fit a lot of bags in a locker. You can have heavier lockers. Some of the ones that are more of a challenge are like Cashmere. Centennial's definitely on the lighter side as well. So those ones, it's tough to get over 100.
Do we still grow Cashmere? I thought.
Yeah, there is still out there. I
thought we were getting rid of Cashmere, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't break my heart if we did, but it's on our farm and people have requested it, so it's a challenge.
Brendon, you mentioned watching the lifespan of these hops in the locker, and I'm curious what the range of that, how different some of these individual hop varieties might be in the way that that they react over time. I mean, obviously these are plants of the same family, but there's this wide range between them. What is the kind of scope of that variability that you see?
Yeah, for sure. It's something that we're obviously still trying to determine and figure out. I think last year especially, we started to play around with a lot of different varieties. In the years past, we really only focused on one or two. And so we're starting to see more of the genetic variation in terms of the storability and just the respiration rates we're seeing. To give you an example, Simcoe will respire about half that of Centennial, and then Mosaic is maybe somewhere in between. So it's interesting to see the differences in terms of their respiration rate. And typically we can kind of extrapolate, okay, a lower respiration rate will typically generate a longer storage life. But for the most part, they all been successful. But as we think and seek to extend those storage potentials, certainly I think the genetics will start to become a really big factor in that. And so it's part of our R&D process. And luckily, Tyler's got a lot of different genotypes, and so we're getting more exposure to that and working with the brewers to deliver the optimal product and optimal varieties that they want.
Tyler, from your perspective, there's now, after those are packed into lockers, there's now another logistical challenge of keeping those cold, getting those to, out to end brewers, and kind of, maintaining that process. Talk about what you then do from your perspective to ease those logistics. The upside is that compared to, say, air shipping, which again, with hops and this kind of weight, is extraordinarily expensive and also pretty carbon intensive. This technology then allows for you to kind of aggregate shipments, plan logistics for refrigerated trucks to drop off to specific markets, and kind of, collaborate between brewers so that they can, consolidate shipments together and reduce shipping costs. Talk a little bit about that logistics piece, that the RipeLocker allows now with fresh hops.
Yeah, so one of the things we've tried to do on our form, on our website, is ask guys if they are willing to be a hub for us. And what I mean by hub is basically think of a hub and spoke model where we're distributing a large aggregate shipment, say a 53-foot trailer, a refrigerated truck, down to a region that has a lot of breweries in it, and someone who's one of the bigger players in the area, maybe like Bart at Coronado, for instance, they can act as a receiving destination, and then from there, other breweries who are local or proximal can come and grab those from the hub, from the center, basically, whoever the major receiver is. And then what I can do is I can start to plan just one major shipment to a region as opposed to 10 or 15 shipments to each individual brewery in an area. And that keeps everybody's freight costs manageable and makes logistics a lot easier. Because then all I have to do is just tell people, okay, hey, on this date, we're going to be in San Diego. Come grab your hops from this guy. Here's his contact information. And that makes everything a lot simpler and more cost effective for both parties, both us and them.
How does the technology then work on the flip side? Because now after a brewer's used the hops from the RipeLocker still now needs to get back up to your hop growing region, so that it can be used again. What does that piece of the process look like?
Yeah, that part of the puzzle, I don't think we've necessarily solved for exactly. We still have these lockers out there. I think that, it's a challenge to get them back. That's something Rowan and I previously were working on, kind of a plan that would make that effective. And what it may simply turn into is repurposing them in these different regions, because a lot of these areas are close to agricultural regions where there's other suppliers of other crops. And it might just be turning, hey, we've got a RipeLocker down in Sacramento area, and maybe we turn them over to someone who has a crop nearby who'd want to use them for their product. So I think that could potentially be a model. Another would just be, at the end of the season, making a trucking route around the country to collect them all and bring them back to the headquarters for next season. But that's certainly a side of things I think that needs to, at least from my perspective, I'm not sure quite what happens to them after they leave our place and they get to the brewers. That's something I think RipeLocker is working on. Brendon, you might have more of an answer for that question than I do.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, California is obviously an easier one because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of production there. We have a lot of producers that we work with avocados and berries in California, so repurposing them in California is no problem. When they go more towards like the East Coast and the production for other crops isn't as prevalent out there, then we need to factor in the backhaul costs into the whole equation and try to make that as profitable and economic as possible. But it's something that we're working on as a company for everything, because a lot of the stuff that we ship, we're shipping even internationally in some cases, and so trying to figure out, hub and spoke, can you connect it, bring it back with something else, or just factoring in that cost into the equation. So it's a good question.
But then, at the same time, you're trying to build a critical mass out here for use of it, because like everything, it's just like, a keg leasing program from something like MicroStar. It's the volume that makes that more cost effective across everything. Yep. And so building the usage and the demand first, and then building that kind of critical mass that helps solve some of the, the backhaul questions there too. Sure.
Exactly.
Tyler or Brendon, from a brewer perspective, like, there are a number of leading brewers that have been trying this out. I know folks like Treehouse have been using RipeLocker. Obviously you do, Bart, Roadhouse, Bear Bottle in San Francisco. Are there some other brewers that you found are really, connecting with fresh hops through RipeLocker?
Yeah, I'd say in general, the breweries that this technology works best for are kind of on the periphery of where it would be feasible to get to a hop growing valley and actually retrieve the fresh hops themselves. So if they're further than 12 hours out, it's pretty hard to get to a valley to actually acquire fresh hops and get them back to your brewery before they expire. So a lot of breweries kind of in an arc around the Pacific Northwest. If you could almost take the country and draw like a C around kind of the Midwest, around the Southeast, Texas, Arizona, Southern California, even all the way through Colorado, Wyoming, that band of breweries in that kind of state range, they still have customers that want fresh hops, because a lot of them have relocated from cities that fresh hops are easily acquirable and fresh hop brews are a common thing. But maybe they've moved to this new city and that's not an option and they wish it was. And so they have a customer base that has that demand for fresh hop beers, but as a brewery, they can't actually get them. So breweries in that range geographically are a great fit for this technology. And they're also not so far that freight costs are getting inhibitive. So it works really well for breweries in that kind of targeted geography. And then what I would say from there is just that, breweries that have requested this and had a lot of excitement, or we've sold to, were there was Harland Brewing in San Diego was a customer of ours last year. Jackson Hole, obviously you mentioned, Roadhouse, and we've got Temescal in San Francisco was also a customer. So what we're really trying to focus on is some of these markets where we already have traction and building those out more and acquiring additional breweries in those regions, just because then we can really start to employ that hub and spoke model, and that just works best for everybody, especially because this this project of ours as a farm working with RipeLocker this is only our third year attempted to do it. So we're still very much, if you're to think of it in any other business framework, it's a startup. So we're still tackling new development problems at all times and trying to figure out how to reach people with this exciting idea.
Sure. What from your perspective, you see people's orders. What are the most popular hops from a fresh hop perspective? What are brewers reaching out to you for the most?
Yeah, it's Mosaic. Mosaic is number one. It always is. So they want the most of it. They know that's when I'm the busiest as a farmer, and they're like, we want you to give us more of this. So I'm like, all right. So no, yeah, in all seriousness, it's always Mosaic or Citra. Citra are definitely, those are our top two picks. And, and it's great to be able to send those because those are also the most desirable hops we have just based off prior year's selections. Even in the dry hop market, that's what sells out the quickest. We have guys buying whole lots of that stuff from us. So it's cool to be able to provide the marketplace with both a really high quality dry hop product and then now be able to sell them fresh hop product as well of the same high desirability variety.
Bart, have you had, in terms of the fresh hop varieties that you use, anything exciting on the horizon or something you're looking forward to trying soon?
So first year I used Mosaic, and then second year we did Mosaic and El Dorado, and I was blown away with the El Dorado. So I know I want to get that again this year if possible. But I think I would like to expand the horizons a little bit. Maybe even go back into the past. Maybe do some Cascade. I think would be kind of fun. I've been kind of on a Cascade kick. I think like some other brewers around here. I think Cascade has been very nice the past couple of years. So I think that would be nice to kind of give that a shot. We'll see. I don't know what you think about that, Tyler, but if that's possible, like that's the direction we're going to look forward this year.
Yeah, we're game for anything.
Very cool. Bart, how, you guys are in San Diego. You're not necessarily close to a hop growing region, but it's a pretty good distance. The idea of fresh hops resonate in the upper Pacific Northwest where people are close to them and the brewers market them. And there's this seasonality that now people expect around the harvest where they connect with these beers. How do you tell a story of fresh hops to consumers? Because this is expensive. Going through this process of bringing fresh hops in is far more expensive, than using, dried pelletized hops. Oftentimes, if you've got a brewery that wants to recoup some of the additional expense, those are going to be higher priced beers. Some brewers don't do that and just sell them at their normal price and eat the difference. But regardless, you have to tell a story to make, to underscore what's interesting and special, because obviously you love us, you want to keep making these, and you need customers to connect with them also in order, for the demand to be there for you to make them. So how do you kind of tell that story?
Yeah, certainly. So I think that it comes back to the brewers, and especially talking about this hub and spoke model we're talking about. So like last year, for example, we got hops and we shared them with Harland, and then Harland and us were both making fresh hop beers. And then going forward in this next year, who knows, might get another 5 people tacking on the order. And then in an ideal situation, we'll get a full truck down. And then there's this, San Diego has a great beer community. So next thing you know, if you have 20, 30, 40 fresh hop IPAs around San Diego, people will go, it's like you build the field, they will come kind of thing. So if we can kind of, as brewers, hop on this and, create the excitement and the buzz around town, I think the people will come and enjoy it. And back to the cost side, maybe it is something that we might eat cost or maybe, charge an extra $1 for the pint. But I think in the long run, the more we can collaborate, which, we're a great city for collaboration, and, increase order and increase cost savings, then it kind of opens up the door to make these unique beers more affordable. And luckily we have a lot of legacy brewers down here, you get, some of the OGs. So with plenty of guys have done the the pilgrimage up to Yakima. We as brewers know it, but the consumers and our drinkers don't necessarily understand all the hops that we're getting are coming from the Pacific Northwest and why and what a fresh hop is. So I think the first steps are going all in, getting the community of brewers behind it, and then as brewers, our responsibility is to convey the story and share our passion with our consumers. And I think that, with such a unique product and, hops make it pretty easy for a brewer to get excited to talk about. I think we can share our excitement with the consumer. And, with such a unique product, a fresh hop beer is so unique, so different, and so delicious that I think, people will try it and they'll be like, you know what, I'll have a pint, even if it's $9. And you know what, I'll have another one. And, oh, you're going to put that into a can this year? I think we'll take that home. So I think as a community together, we can all buy into it. And I think as brewers, if we buy into it, the consumers they'll be so grateful.
I love that beautiful collaborative approach of craft brewers all doing it together and not needing to do it singularly. And also in terms of seasonals that we all love to drink, I mean, fresh hop beers, that's got to be at the very top of most beer lovers' lists of favorite seasonal beers, to enjoy. Well, maybe let's close here with one just broad question that each of you can answer. What do you think is the most exciting opportunity that this new approach to fresh hop brewing that RipeLocker allows for? What do you think the most exciting piece is, and what are you most excited to see as brewers develop, and use this technology in the future? And maybe we can start off with you, Tyler.
Yeah, I'd say the most exciting thing is just the ability to create fresh hop markets in parts of the country that have never had a fresh hop market before, just because of the logistical constraints and the fact that hops, if you don't have them in a RipeLocker, will expire. So that is something that is really cool. And I think it's going to, create a value-added product that can now be massively expanded and not just be a niche experience for people who live close to either the Sun Valley or the Willamette Valley or the Yakima Valley. So I think that to me is what's exciting about it. And I think that has huge potential. So
how about you, Bart?
I'm on board with that. I think that kind of makes the most sense for me, just being able to expand the horizons. But I was kind of thinking I would like to almost question and challenge Brendon if this is a possibility. With our Southern Hemisphere friends harvest being 180 days or so difference, maybe 150 depending on late harvest and early harvest for us. Do you think it's a possibility in the future that there could be a fresh hop Southern Hemisphere and Northern Hemisphere beer using RipeLocker technology?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bart. It's something that we've actually looked into. We had some preliminary discussions with some growers in New Zealand specifically for this exact use case. The challenge that we have right now is that the USDA has no regulation around the shipment of fresh hops, in and out of these types of countries, right? Because then you start to think about importing, you have pests and all these other challenges that start to happen from the importation of agricultural products. And typically hops, are kilned products, so no insect's going to be able to survive that. But when you start to then move to a wet hop, now it's a live plant and the regulations are totally different. And because this is something that's never really been done before, they don't have any guidelines or regulations in place for that. So it's something that we really want to do, but I think we're going to need the support of the industry, education for the USDA scientists and APHIS to try to, work through those regulations. Technologically, we can make it happen. That's what we do with a lot of other commodities. We put product into chambers, put them on boats, and we can send them internationally. But since there's nothing really in place yet for wet hops into the US, we're a bit restricted in that at the moment. But it's something that we would love to do, and I think is a great opportunity with the leveraging of this technology.
Very cool stuff potentially on this horizon. Super awesome. And I think we've got to bring this to a close. Thanks again for joining me on this special fresh hop focused episode of the podcast brought to you interruption free by RipeLocker. Visit ripelocker.com for more information, or you can visit Oasis Farms freshhops.com and explore the ways you can use fresh hops from Oasis Farms preserved in RipeLocker chambers in your fresh hop beers this upcoming harvest. Bart, Tyler, Brendon, thanks for sharing your thoughts on brewing and fresh hops and wet hops. It's been great talking with all of you all. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.